Hello and welcome back to our series on beginning app script for HR brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions, and in today's video I would like to create a dependent dropdown. What we did in our last video is we created our menu item and then we created a drop-down item within that menu item, and that ran a code to create a drop-down list with certain items in it. What a dependent drop-down list is, or a dependent drop-down box, I guess you could say, is another box's values are dependent on another box's selection. So if we hit yes here and we had another box over here, the values of this box would change. And if we had no, then the values over here would change. So it would be selectable only based on what the no was or the yes. And to do that, what we would need is a event trigger. And that trigger is going to be looking for the change or the edit of a specific cell. And we've referenced the trigger before in a previous video. We used on edit. I mean, there are other triggers. We have on change, we have on selection change, but since we went over on edit, we're going to use that. Now we just can't go in and use it straight as is, because what happens is if we use on edit just straight out of the box, so to speak, it's going to run that code every single time something happens within this sheet. And we don't want that. That's just a whole lot of waste of time. And plus, we don't want somebody trying to type in employee and having it change every single character. We don't want to do that. But what we can do is take on edit and change it just a little bit. We can ensure that even though on edit is always listening, it only does something when something specific happens. So there's a few things that I want to do before we jump into that. And the first one is I want to take this box out of A19 and I want to move it over here to our dashboard. And let's put it here in A3 on our dashboard and then get it out of our records here. So let's delete that. We'll get rid of our validation. So let's go back to our code here. And our code, we have this create DD function, and we're declaring a variable, and that variable is equal to this sheet. Well, the sheet is our record sheet. So we don't want that. We want this, our dashboard sheet. So we can just replace that. And then instead of the range 19.1 on that dashboard, we want it to be 3. Now this is the same as if we were writing A3. It's the same exact thing. I just like the numbers. Maybe once we get down here and do something a little different and create that on edit function and start tweaking it, we'll use the A1 notation to where we can use A3 just so you can see how to use it. So now it should populate in that dashboard sheet and then at this range. And then you'll notice that we have our list items here hard-coded in line with this required value in list. You'll also see that this is an array. What we can do is let's instead create a variable. Let's call that variable first drop-down list. That'll work. And then what we can do is create this, and let's create it something HRE. So let's go employee, because we want to know if an individual user is wanting to work with an employee, if they want to work with a candidate record, if they want to run people analytics. And then anytime that I'm creating selections or drop-down boxes, I always put unknown. Simply because if somebody selects unknown, we want to be able to help them out. And we can help them out by an alert. We can help them out by, a tooltip, depending on where this is located. We just don't want to leave them hanging. So instead of having this hard coded now, we can actually simply pass this variable that is already in the form of an array to that method, to this require value in list method. And it'll still work exactly the same, except where it's pulling from, what it's creating in the list, and where that list is going. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's come back over to our sheet to make sure that we have everything working. And I'll refresh this. Every time I refresh it, I've got to remember to make it bigger because I know it's very hard to see in that. So now when we run this, it should not populate here. It should come over here and populate right there. So let's go to our records and we'll run this. And as you can see, we can run it from different places. So let's just run it from here. As you can see, it populated here with our new list. And there's nothing over here in our record. So good. So that part works. Now what we're wanting to do is when a user grabs or selects something like, say, employee, we want a secondary list that is dependent on that to populate a list based on that selection. So employee would have things like archive record, update record, whatever. People analytics would have none of that, except it would have compensation analysis, all of our people analytics stuff. So that's what we're wanting. And to do that, as I mentioned before, we can come over to our code here and actually take on edit and change it just a little bit. So we're not just leaving it straight out of the box to do whatever as its base function. We are taking that built-in function and then we are narrowing it down to what it is that we want. So let's go ahead and type that function in there. So function on edit, and this is the way that on edit function looks. And this time we are actually going to use an argument. And what we're wanting this argument to be is the event. I mean, we are attempting to look for a specific event. And when we think about argument and naming arguments, it's always best practice to make it somewhat memorable of what it's actually doing, just like our variables. So a common practice when you're dealing with an event or say an element is simply to use the letter E. And we are going to be changing this E because we're having it look. Because remember, this on edit function is going to always be running this. Anytime that somebody changes something in that spreadsheet, this function is going to run. But what we want it to do is not do anything unless this value of E changes to what we want. And what we're wanting this E to look for is not the whole sheet. We don't want the whole sheet, both tabs. What we want is just that dashboard tag. And I know this may come off a little confusing, such as that map method or filter method. But as you start using this a little bit more and more, it will start to make sense. I struggled quite a bit with arguments and parameters until I did it enough times to where a light bulb just went off and I realized, okay, I got it now. And then I was able to really change things and fine tune it to get to where it is that I need it. So don't worry if you don't get this and understand the whole why. You will have the code that you can change to get you where you need to be. And then the full understanding will come later. So what we want this E to be is we want this E to essentially focus on the source. And that source, we want to be that dashboard sheet. So we can do get sheet by name. It's going to be dashboard. Oops. There we go. So now if we were to go over and change something in uh, our regular sheet, our record sheet, this on edit wouldn't fire. So we've drilled down to where it's only focused on this dashboard sheet. And what we're going to need to do inside that dashboard sheet is drill it down even further to a specific cell. So let's create that cell. Let's create a variable called first DD cell, and let's make that equal to, we're going to use A1 notation. So let's make that equal to A3, because that's where we're going to want to put it. And again, you can say get range 3-1, but we'll use get A1, which is fine. And then what we want to check this first DD cell is if this range source, if this this on edit, happens in that A3 cell. So to do that, we can simply write an if statement. And if that event occurs in the range, we're going to use A1. So to use A1 notation, you can simply write that. That's a method that's buried in. The same thing with range. And if that A1 notation is strictly equal to, and we'll just grab this because we stored it in a variable, then we want our code to do something. And what we would like our code to do just initially is let's just give it an alert. So remember, we saved our UI up here in a constant variable, so we can actually set an alert to pop up on the screen. So let's just give ourselves an alert, and we will say that alert is first DD cell changed. Of course, this has to be an alert. So alerts are great for talking to our users and giving them instructions, but it's also great to check to make sure our code is working properly. And just for the sake of illustrations and to show what is occurring when, let's create another alert up here before we drill down into the dashboard. So let's do UI alert. And in this alert, we will say something happened somewhere. Okay, so now let's save this. So if something happens outside of this A3 cell in this dashboard sheet, we should get this alert here. And if something does happen in our A3 cell, we're going to get this alert because that happens before. And then we are going to get this alert. So let's go back to our sheet and let's delete that and refresh. So we're refreshing our sheet. Now let's go over to our records. Now, if we were to change something in here, guess we got to run the code first. So if we were to change something in our records, you'll see that something happened somewhere. So it's picking it up. It's always listening. And then if we delete that, we'll get something happened somewhere. Now, if we go back over to our dashboard and then type in something, you'll see we'll get that something happened somewhere. Now let's change. Yep, we got it. Now let's change this drop-down box. So let's go over to our drop-down box and change it. People analytics. Something happened somewhere. Yep. Now it should run that if statement that we built and populate that second alert. First DD cell changed. So you can see that it's running that first one regardless and only running that second one when we fired off that cell. So let's go back here and erase this something happened somewhere, and we'll save it. We'll delete that, and then let's refresh our screen, and then we'll zoom in. And now when we change something, you'll see that we can type and we don't get that alert anymore because we didn't tell it to do anything. It's listening, but it's not doing a thing, which is good. Now, if we do, say, candidate, we get that alert. So that is exactly the functionality. Excuse me, I got to share this. You can see that we can type in here, nothing happens. And then when we change our drop down here, we're going to get that second alert. So our functionality is actually working the way it is that we want to. Now we just need to populate our second drop down box. So let's go back over here to our code. And what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to create a second if statement. So we know that we're only changing, we're wanting to create that box once this first DD cell changed. And depending on the value of this cell, we want to populate certain lists. So first thing we need to do is get the value of this cell. What we can do is just enter that. Let's create another variable, and it can be inside our if statement. Now, since this let is inside our if statement, it's going to be accessible to this if statement. We won't be able to call it up here or outside of it. And what we can do is just call this first DD value. And now what we can do is we can go to our dashboard sheet, dashboard SS variable, and get a range. And that range is our A3. And we can just type A3 in here. That's fine. And that A3, once we're on that cell, we want to get the value of that A3. So we do get value. And what it's going to do is it's going to store that value in a variable. And what we can do is instead of having this populate something, we can simply just pass that value here. So let's save this and then go back and give this a go and see if that piece is actually working the way that we want it to. Yep. Okay, good. So we didn't necessarily create a new function, so we didn't have to refresh it. And as you can see, it is now populating the value of that. So now that we know the value of this, we can then run another if statement inside that if statement called a nested if statement and create a list that is based on the value of this. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's come over here to our code and let's create that next if statement. And this, when we have nested if statements or things like loops or whatnot, this is when indentations become incredibly important because we don't want to think that one of our nested if statement pieces or functions belongs to this. We want to be able to make sure that we can read it from top to bottom. So if first DD value is strictly equal to employee, we want to run a block of code. And for now, what I would like to do is just simply do an alert. Oh no, we can just go straight through because we'll know if it fires or not if it doesn't do anything. And what we want to do is create If that is the case, we want to create a variable called imp list. And this imp list is going to be an array, because this is what we're going to populate it for. And we can do archive record. We'll just do 2 for now. And update record. And then what we would want that to do is this right here. So what we'll do is we will now just copy this so we don't have to retype the wheel. And one thing we want to be sure about is when we copy and paste, we want to ensure that everything that we copied is changed appropriately. So let's create a new clean variable. This isn't going to be first DD list. This is going to be imp list. And then we want to build that. And then we want to set the drop down box as at a different cell, because if we just left it as DD cell, it's going to come up. Well, it won't go anywhere because we haven't declared that, but we need to create this variable here. And then it's not going to be the DD rule, it's going to be the DD2 rule. So let's create this drop down 2 cell. And that needs to be outside of this if statement. So the whole if statement can access it. Let's do DD2 cell, and that one is going to be B3. Yeah, you know what? Let's do it right below it, B4. We'll do it right below it. Well, I guess right below it would be B. Yeah, B4. There we go. And this is going to be that. So now what we can do is actually check again, because if this comes back false, we need to do something else. So let's do else if, and we can use this same exact code snippet here and just change appropriately. So if the first DD value equals, our next one is what, candidate, let's just simply do move to higher or reject. Okay, and then this isn't going to be employee list. Let's make this candidate list. And our D2 rule is going to equal that. So we can leave that there. That's fine. This isn't going to be employee list. This is going to be canned list. And we want that in the D3 cell. Okay, perfect. So now what we can do is go a little bit faster. And if that value is going to be equal to people analytics, what we can do is change this, not candidate list. Let's do this as PA list. And that PA list is going to be comp analysis or time to hire, whatever. And our D2 rule, we can still leave this D2 rule here. That's going to be fine. This is one of those that we could actually move up here to a more global or local outside of our if statement, but it's fine here. So let's change this to PA. And then instead of having to go through and say else if unknown, because that's the only one left, we could simply just come down here and say else UI alert, please contact HR. Okay, good. Good, good, good. So let's get rid of this alert here because we don't need it. We will know if this fires. So let's save it. Looks good. So our first cell should populate in A3, and then our second cell should populate in B4. And that second cell is not going to populate until we either select employee, candidate, or people analytics. So let's go back to our sheet here. And let's refresh this. We did quite a bit of code. Let's make sure it all gets picked up. And now let's change. Let's start typing something. Make sure it doesn't trigger. Interesting. So we may actually have to look at that else. And the reason why this is populating is you'll see that. You'll see that why. Actually, let's go back and change that now. So the reason why this else is being populated here is because this else is responding to this larger if. So if we took this else off, and instead of having it there, having it here inside this, that should actually take care of it. Because now the else is going to be right here. So let's indent this. We'll indent that. That's what I was meaning about indentation. So what we were doing was we were not including the else on this if statement. We were including the else on this if statement. So if it didn't equal that first one, then it would just go ahead and run it. And we essentially negated what it is that we did up here. So now let's make sure that we have all of our curly brackets. That curly bracket should be our function. Yep. Okay. So now let's go back and save this. Share our tab. We will refresh. I'll zoom in for y'all. We'll delete this. We should not get anything and nothing. So now when we select something, say we'll select unknown, it's not actually going to produce that secondary drop-down box here. It's going to say, please contact HR. Okay, I'll do that. And HR got me squared away, gave me a little bit of training, and now I know that I need to go to my employee. Now when it runs, it's going to go through, and it's checking its if statement now. We might have to reload it. Let's reload it. Nothing. All right, let's figure out what in the world's going on here. We may be missing a piece here. Okay, DD2 cell equals B4. We want to, that's what it is. We have this DD2 cell here just saying B4, but we're not telling them what it is. We're not telling Google Apps Script what it actually is. So what we need to do is we need to declare that in our dashboard SS, get range, and then we can put B4. So that should take care of that. Okay. So now let's go back here and see if that did anything. Once it gets done saving it. Okay, good. Saved. So now let's come back here and refresh this. create it, and we'll make it big. Have it come up here and type it. Nothing. And if we come down here to select unknown, we'll fire that please contact HR off. And now when we fire something that actually works, you'll see that it created it exactly where we wanted it to be, which is B4. We actually wanted it over here, so we'll change that to A4. But the point is we now have a secondary box that the values change based on this. So we have archive record and update record. So let's go to candidate. You'll see that it's changed to move to hire and reject. Now you can get really too fast about this and kind of beat this to the punch, if you will. And there's a way around that. What we can do is remove the validation and then reset the validation, and we'll do that the next video. Let's go ahead and change this over here though, because that's kind of irritating me. Not A4, it is, or not B4. We're wanting it at A4. It's the problem when you work with one way or the other. Since I work with numbers, it's hard for me to visualize A4, believe it or not. So now let's go back over here. We'll share this. Let's get rid of all of this validation. Let's remove all. We'll delete that. Yes, I know. We'll contact HR. And we'll refresh it. We'll create our drop down. Our first one will pop up here. We'll go to employee. There it is, populating one right down below it. And that employee is update archive record. Let's check out people analytics. You'll see the saving, comp analysis, time to hire. So what we've essentially done is created a just 2-level dependent drop down box. And the next video, what we'll do is we will add on to this. We'll build a little bit more functionality, different lists in here. And we will also clean up that lag by simply having the first thing that this does is removes that validation. Because if somebody selects it, then it's going to pop up that invalid. So we just need to erase that. So we'll fix that the next go around. And then what we'll do is we will create a third drop down based on that. And when we have the third drop down, you'll be able to carry it all the way through just by repeating that cycle. So I hope this episode was informative to you and you enjoyed it. And if you have, please hit that subscribe button. We can continue to bring you these series. And I hope to see you the next series. And until then, please take care.